The galaxy had forgotten about Earth a long time ago. 300 years had passed since the Galactic Concord placed humanity under quarantine. The great powers of civilized space had looked at the small blue planet and seen nothing but trouble. Humans were violent. Humans were emotional. Humans fought wars over land, over ideas, over things that made no sense to species who had evolved beyond such primitive behavior. Ambassador of the Federation had said it best during the quarantine hearings. He had stood before the Concord with his silver skin shimmering under the council lights and declared that humans were apex predators who never evolved past their hunger. The other species had agreed. Earth was marked as a developing world, too dangerous to be trusted with faster-than-light travel, too unstable to join the galactic community. So they built a barrier around the Sol system. They placed warning beacons at its borders. They told their children stories about the savage world at the edge of known space, where creatures killed each other over resources they did not need and beliefs they could not prove. And then they forgot. The Draconian Dominion did not forget. The Draconians never forgot anything, because the Draconians were conquerors. They had burned their way across 200 worlds in the last 1,000 years. Their empire stretched across an entire arm of the galaxy, built on the bones of species who had tried to resist them. Emperor the Undying ruled the Dominion from his throne on Draconis Prime. He was ancient by any species standards, kept alive by technology and pure hatred. His scales were black as void space, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of a creature who had never known defeat. When announced his intention to cleanse Earth, the Galactic Concord held an emergency session. Representatives from 12 species gathered to discuss the matter. They talked for 3 days. They expressed concern. They drafted strongly worded letters, and then they did nothing. The Draconians were too powerful. Their armada numbered 40,000 warships, each one carrying weapons that could turn continents into glass. No species in the galaxy had the strength to oppose them. They had tried once, and their border colonies still glowed with radiation 2 centuries later. So the Conquered watched as broadcast his ultimatum across all frequencies. The message reached every corner of civilized space. It reached Earth. Humans of Sol, the Emperor's voice rumbled through the transmission. You have 30 solar days to surrender unconditionally. Your planet will be processed. Your species will be. Those who are useful will serve the Dominion. Those who are not will be eliminated. This is not a negotiation. This is a mercy. You have 30 days. The galaxy waited for Earth's response. Bookmakers on Prime began taking bets on how long humanity would survive once the Armada arrived. The most optimistic predictions gave them 6 hours. Most expected less. Earth's response came 12 hours after its ultimatum. It was not what anyone expected. An elderly human woman appeared on screens across the galaxy. She had gray hair pulled back in a simple style, and her face carried the lines of someone who had lived a long and difficult life. Her name was Wei, and she was the director of the United Earth Defense Council. She did not beg. She did not threaten. She did not make grand speeches about human courage or the right to exist. She simply said, "We decline." Then the transmission ended. The conquered representatives looked at each other in confusion. The Draconians laughed. Ambassador felt something strange stir in his chest. His species was empathic, able to feel the emotions of others across vast distances. He had expected to feel fear from Earth, terror, despair. Instead, he felt nothing. Earth had gone silent in a way that made his scales itch. The 30 days passed slowly for the rest of the galaxy. News networks broadcast constant coverage of the coming extinction event. Scholars debated whether humanity had any cultural artifacts worth preserving. Military analysts explained in detail how the Draconian Armada would systematically destroy Earth's defenses, such as they were. On Earth, no one spoke to the outside universe. Satellites went dark. Transmissions stopped. The planet that had been so noisy for so long became perfectly, absolutely quiet. The Draconians assembled their fleet at the edge of the Sol system on the 31st day. Was a creature of precision. He had promised 30 days, and he would give them exactly 30 days before beginning the cleansing. It was a point of pride. 40,000 warships hung in the void between Mars and Jupiter. Their formation was so vast that it created its own gravity shadow. The flagship, Eternal Dominion, sat at the center of the fleet, its hull covered in the trophies of 100 conquered worlds. Admiral the Younger, the Emperor's eldest son, commanded the fleet from the bridge of the flagship. He was eager to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. This would be his first extermination, and he intended to make it memorable. "Begin the approach," he ordered. "Standard cleansing formation. I want the primary population centers destroyed within the first hour." The fleet began to move toward Earth. Sensors detected no resistance. No ships rose to meet them. No weapons powered up. The blue planet hung in space like a fruit waiting to be picked. Admiral smiled. This would be easier than he had hoped. And then, as the fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, something changed. Every sensor on every ship detected it at the same moment. A pulse of energy, vast beyond measurement, rippled outward from Earth. It passed through the fleet like a wave through water, and in its wake, the laws of physics began to bend. Admiral's navigation officer looked up from his console with confusion on his scaled face. "Sir," he said slowly, "I'm reading some kind of spatial distortion. Earth is. The planet is still there, but I cannot lock targeting systems onto it." "Explain," demanded. The officer shook his head. "I cannot, sir. According to my instruments, Earth is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Space around the planet is folding." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, surrounded by the mightiest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled, Admiral the Younger felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid. Across 40,000 ships, 12 million Draconian soldiers looked toward a small blue planet that had started to glow with impossible light. They had come to destroy a primitive world. They had not expected the primitive world to wake up. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in chambers that had existed before humanity learned to walk upright, Admiral stood at the center of the greatest secret in human history. Installation Omega was not supposed to exist. No government had built it. No corporation had funded it. The chambers around her were carved from stone that was older than the dinosaurs, filled with machines that operated on principles human science still did not fully understand. The walls hummed with power. Lights that had been dark for 10,000 years now blazed with cold blue fire. Watched the displays around her and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. "Status report," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. "All 2,000 installations are online," her second-in-command replied. "Lunar arrays are powered and aligned. We are ready to execute Protocol Prometheus on your order, Admiral." Nodded slowly. She thought about her grandmother, who had been one of the first scientists to discover the ruins beneath the ocean floor. She thought about her mother, who had spent her entire life studying the technology the ruins contained. 3 generations of her family had worked toward this moment, and they had never told anyone outside the project. The galaxy believed that humans were alone in the Sol system. They believed that Earth had developed in isolation, a single spark of life in an empty corner of space. They were wrong. 10,000 years ago, another species had called Earth home. The humans who discovered their ruins had named them the architects because their technology seemed to reshape reality itself. They had built cities in dimensions that human eyes could not see. They had learned to fold space like paper, to step between moments of time like walking through doors. And then they had vanished. The architects had left behind only their empty chambers and a single message: carved into walls across 1,000 hidden sites on Earth. The message was simple. The message was terrifying. They are coming, we could not stop them, perhaps you can. For 300 years, while the galaxy ignored humanity, the greatest minds on Earth had worked to understand what the architects had left behind. They reverse-engineered machines that should not have been possible. They learned to manipulate forces that had no names in any human language. They built weapons. Director's voice echoed through the installation speakers, transmitted from her command center on the other side of the world. All stations, this is the director. The Draconian fleet has entered the Sol system. They believe we are helpless. They believe we are primitive. They are about to learn how wrong they are. Felt a grim smile cross her face. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. Every drill, every simulation, every sleepless night had led to this single point in time. Initiate Protocol Prometheus, commanded. Across the planet, 2,000 hidden facilities activated simultaneously. Power plants that had been disguised as geological formations roared to life. Satellite networks that the galaxy thought were primitive communication arrays revealed their true purpose. On the dark side of the moon, structures that had waited in silence began to split open. The Draconian fleet detected the energy surge immediately. Their sensors screamed warnings as power levels spiked beyond anything their instruments could measure. Admiral, the younger, stared at his displays with growing horror. "What is happening?" he demanded. "What are they doing?" His science officer worked frantically at her console, scales pale with shock. "Sir, I am detecting massive spatial distortions emanating from the planet. They are manipulating the fabric of space itself." "That is impossible," snarled. "That technology does not exist. No species has ever achieved." "Sir," the navigation officer shouted, "we are moving. The fleet is moving toward the planet." Spun to face the main display. The tactical plot showed his entire armada drifting toward Earth, even though no ship had engaged its engines. They were being pulled, dragged by forces that should not exist. "Full reverse," he commanded. "All ships, maximum thrust away from the planet." 40,000 warships fired their engines at maximum power. The combined thrust was enough to move small moons. It should have pushed them away from Earth at incredible speed. Instead, they moved faster toward the planet. In Installation Omega, Admiral watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The architect technology worked exactly as they had theorized. Space itself was bending around the Sol system, creating a funnel that led directly to Earth. The more the Draconians tried to flee, the faster they fell. "Admiral," one of her officers reported, "enemy fleet is now within the primary effect zone. Spatial compression is at 80% and climbing." "Maintain power," ordered. "Do not let a single ship escape." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, chaos had taken hold. Officers shouted over each other as systems failed and physics stopped making sense. Ships at the edge of the formation tried to break away, but space itself had become a trap. There was no escape. Admiral gripped his command throne with claws that had torn apart enemies on 100 worlds. He had never known fear before this moment. He had never faced an enemy he could not understand. "All ships," he broadcast to his fleet, "target the planet, fire everything. If we are going to die, we will take them with us." Thousands of weapons powered up across the armada. Planet-killer missiles armed themselves. Energy beams capable of cracking continents charged to full power. But when the Draconians tried to fire, their targeting systems found nothing. Earth was there. They could see it with their own eyes. But according to their computers, the planet existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They could not hit something they could not locate. Director's voice crackled across the Draconian communication frequencies. She had accessed their systems as easily as opening a door. "You came here to destroy us," she said calmly. You thought we were weak. You thought we were primitive. You were wrong. The species who lived here before us left a gift, and we have spent 300 years learning how to use it. You are not going to die today, Admiral, but you are going to learn something that your empire has forgotten. Stared at the communication display, his heart's pounding in his chest. What? He demanded. What are we going to learn? His voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of preparation. You are going to learn what happens when you threaten Earth. Space around the fleet began to fold inward. The stars themselves seemed to bend and twist. An admiral, commander of the mightiest armada in galactic history, could only watch as his ships began to fall into the impossible darkness that had opened around them. The swallowing had begun. Captain had served in the Draconian Navy for 40 years. He had fought in 12 major campaigns. He had watched worlds burn and species surrender. He had never, in all that time, felt the kind of terror that now gripped his hearts. His ship, the Fury of Conquest, was a destroyer-class vessel positioned at the edge of the Armada formation. When the order came to retreat, had immediately engaged maximum thrust. His engines roared with enough power to cross star systems in days. But the distance between his ship and Earth was shrinking, not growing. Navigation report, he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. His navigation officer was a young female named. She had graduated at the top of her class, destined for great things in the Dominion service. Now she stared at her console with tears running down her scaled face. "Captain," she whispered, "we are accelerating toward the planet. Engine output is at maximum reverse thrust, but according to my instruments, we are moving forward at increasing speed." "That is not possible," growled. "No, sir, it is not," looked up at him with eyes full of terror. "Captain, I do not think we are being pulled toward Earth. I think space is moving us. The planet is not coming to us. We are already there, we just have not arrived yet." Did not understand what she meant. He was a warrior, not a scientist. But he understood the fear in her voice, and he understood that his ship was going to die. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out on 40,000 vessels. Ships tried to flee in every direction, but every direction led to Earth. Some captains ordered their crews to abandon ship, only to discover that escape pods fell even faster than the ships they left behind. Others tried to ram their vessels into the planet, hoping for at least a warrior's death, but they could not find the planet to hit it. Earth was everywhere. Earth was nowhere. Earth was waiting. On Concord Station, millions of light-years away, the representatives of 12 species watched the battle, if it could be called a battle, through long-range sensors. Ambassador of the stood frozen at his viewing screen, his silver skin rippling with the emotions he was receiving from the Sol system. He felt 12 million Draconians experiencing terror beyond anything their species had ever known. And beneath that, he felt something else, something vast and ancient and patient, something that had been sleeping for a very long time and had finally opened its eyes. "What are they?" Representative of the Conquered whispered beside him. "What have the humans become?" Could not answer. He had no words for what he was feeling. In the Sol system, the swallowing entered its final phase. Admiral the Younger stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion as reality collapsed around him. The showed impossible images, space folding like fabric, stars stretching into lines, his own fleet scattered across dimensions that should not exist. A junior officer was praying to gods that Draconians had not for centuries. Others had simply collapsed at their stations, minds broken by what they were witnessing. Only remained standing, his claws digging into his command throne, his eyes fixed on the blue planet that had become their doom. "All hands," he broadcast on fleet-wide communication, "this is Admiral I have no orders to give. I do not know what is happening. I do not know how to fight this enemy." He paused, drawing a ragged breath. "Die with honor if you can. Die fighting if there is anything left to fight." The communication cut out as his ship crossed the event horizon. Captain felt the fury of conquest shudder around him as impossible forces took hold. He watched Earth grow larger and larger, filling his entire field of vision. But it was not Earth as he had seen it before. It was Earth wrapped in light, Earth surrounded by patterns of energy that hurt his eyes to look at, Earth transformed into something that no longer belonged to the normal universe. Captain said softly, "I want to go home." Reached out and placed a claw on her shoulder. "I know," he said, "so do I." And then the ship fell into the light, and there was nothing. The entire process took 17 minutes. From outside the Sol system, observers watched in stunned silence as the greatest military force in galactic history vanished. One moment, 40,000 warships hung in formation around Mars. The next, they were simply gone. The space they had occupied was empty. Not a single piece of debris remained. Not a single distress signal escaped. The Draconian Armada had been swallowed. When it was over, Earth sat alone in the void. The blue planet looked exactly as it had before, quiet, peaceful, beautiful. If not for the sensor readings that observers had recorded, no one would have believed anything unusual had happened. Then came the transmission. Director Wei's face appeared on screens across the galaxy. She looked tired, noticed. Tired but satisfied. "The Draconian Dominion has been processed," she announced. "Their fleet has been absorbed into dimensional storage facilities constructed for this purpose. Their crews are alive and will remain alive as long as basic diplomatic protocols are followed." She paused, letting her words sink in across 100 listening worlds. 12 million Draconian personnel are currently held in stasis. They will be returned to their empire once we have established formal relations with the Galactic Conquered. We have no interest in prisoners. We have no interest in conquest. We simply wish to demonstrate that Earth is no longer accepting quarantine status. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that made scales itch with primal fear. "We will be visiting soon." The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one on Conquered Station spoke. Representatives who had led their species for centuries stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Was the first to find his voice. They took them alive. They absorbed an entire fleet without killing anyone. "Yes," said slowly, "and that is what terrifies me most." "Why?" The ambassador turned to face his colleague, his empathic senses still reeling from the psychic aftermath of the swallowing. "Because it means they chose not to kill. They had the power to destroy that fleet in an instant. Instead, they captured it. They controlled it." He shook his head slowly. "The Draconians were not defeated, representative. They were collected, like specimens, like samples." He looked back at which now showed only the empty space where the Armada had been. What kind of species has the power to do that, and the restraint not to simply destroy? No one had an answer. Across the galaxy, military commanders began running simulations. Scientists scrambled to analyze the sensor data. Politicians held emergency sessions that lasted through the night. And on Earth, Director Wei finally allowed herself to sleep, knowing that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed forever. The question now was what would happen next. The news spread across civilized space like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the swallowing, every species in the Galactic Conquered knew what had happened. News networks broadcast the sensor footage on constant repeat. Military analysts tried to explain what they had witnessed, but their explanations made no sense. Scientists admitted they did not understand the physics involved. Philosophers debated whether humanity could still be considered a species in any meaningful sense. On Prime, the empathic of ambassadors' people, millions collapsed in the streets. The psychic shockwave from the swallowing had rippled across the galaxy, carrying with it the terror of 12 million Draconians who had fallen into impossible light. Hospitals filled with patients suffering from what their doctors called echo trauma, the lingering effects of experiencing another species' fear at extinction level. On Prime, the great betting houses closed their doors. The odds they had offered on humanity's survival now seemed like a cruel joke. Bookmakers who had become wealthy predicting the outcomes of wars and conflicts found themselves facing something they could not calculate. How do you set odds against a species that can fold space around their planet? On Station, the last survivors of a species that the Draconians had nearly exterminated centuries ago held a quiet celebration. They did not know what humanity was or what they wanted. They only knew that the empire which had burned their world had finally met something it could not destroy. For the first time in generations, they felt something like hope. And on Draconis Prime, Emperor the Undying received the news in silence. The ancient conqueror sat on his throne of bone and iron, listening as his advisors explained what had happened to his son, his fleet, his plans for humanity. His scales, black as void space, seemed to grow darker as they spoke. His eyes, which had burned with cold fire for centuries, slowly dimmed. When the advisors finished their report, said nothing for a long time. "My son," he finally said, his voice like grinding stone, "is he alive?" "We believe so, Emperor," his chief advisor replied carefully. "The humans claim that all captured personnel are being held in stasis. They have offered to return them pending diplomatic negotiations." Negotiations tasted the word like poison. The humans wish to negotiate with the Dominion. "Yes, Emperor." Rose from his throne. He was ancient beyond counting, his body held together by technology and sheer will. He had conquered 200 worlds. He had crushed empires that thought themselves invincible. He had never, not once in his impossibly long life, been defeated. "Prepare a diplomatic vessel," he said quietly. "We will negotiate." His advisors stared at him in shock. The Draconian Dominion did not negotiate. The Draconian Dominion conquered. The Draconian Dominion destroyed. "Emperor," one brave advisor ventured, "surely we cannot simply accept." "Accept what?" Turned to face the speaker, and the advisor fell silent immediately. "Accept that we have been defeated. Accept that our greatest fleet was swallowed like prey by a species we thought to exterminate." His voice rose to a roar that shook the throne room. "Accept that everything I have built for 1,000 years means nothing against a power we cannot understand." He looked around at his advisors, his counselors, the generals and admirals who had served him for centuries. "Yes," he said, his voice dropping back to a whisper, "we will accept all of this, because the alternative is extinction." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in council chambers and military headquarters. The Galactic Concord held an emergency summit that lasted for 2 weeks. Representatives from 12 species debated what to do about humanity. Some argued for immediate surrender to whatever terms the humans demanded. Others insisted that the conquered must prepare for war, must find a way to defend against whatever weapon Earth possessed. A small faction led by Ambassador suggested something different. "We must ask ourselves," he told the assembly, "why the humans did not simply destroy the fleet. They had the power. They demonstrated the power, but they chose to capture rather than kill. Perhaps they are keeping the Draconians as hostages," representatives suggested. "Perhaps they intend to use them as leverage." "Leverage for what?" responded. "They could take whatever they wanted. They could destroy any fleet we send against them. They could fold space around the way they folded it around their own. They do not need hostages." "Then why?" another representative demanded. "Why keep millions of enemy soldiers alive?" Spread his hands. "Perhaps because they are not our enemies. Perhaps because they value life in a way we do not expect from a species we called savage." The debate continued, but no consensus emerged. The conquered was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, military analysts ran their simulations again and again, trying to find a weakness in Earth's defenses. The results were always the same. If humanity could fold space around a single system, there was no reason they could not do the same to any point in the galaxy. Every fleet, every station, every world was potentially vulnerable. "We have been fools," Admiral of the Defense Force admitted to his staff. "For 300 years, we thought we were keeping the humans contained. We thought we were protecting the galaxy from their violence." He stared at the tactical displays showing the empty space where the Draconian Armada had been. "Instead, we were locked in a cage with something we did not understand, and now the cage is open." On Earth, Director Wei watched the galaxy's reaction with quiet satisfaction. The plan had worked exactly as they had hoped. The Conquered was frightened, yes, but they were also thinking. They were questioning assumptions they had held for centuries. "Director," Admiral reported from Installation Omega, "we are receiving communication requests from 17 different species. The Draconians have dispatched a diplomatic vessel, and the Conquered has formally requested a summit meeting." Nodded slowly, "And the prisoners?" "Stable in dimensional storage. Life signs are normal. They are not suffering." "Good," stood and walked to the window of her office, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, the captured fleet floated in pockets of folded space, waiting to be released. 12 million lives that humanity could have ended with a thought. "We are not monsters," she said softly, more to herself than to. "We never were, we were just different. And now the galaxy will have to learn what that means." "What do we do now, Director?" Turned back to face the display, showing the galaxy's panicked response to their demonstration. "Now," she said, "we tell them the truth. We tell them why we built this weapon. We tell them what is coming." She paused, her expression growing dark. "And then we pray they believe us, because we cannot face what is coming alone." 6 months after the swallowing, the first human diplomatic vessel arrived at Concord Station. The ship was called the Olive Branch, and it was small by galactic standards. 100 meters long, unarmed, carrying a crew of just 12. Next to the massive warships that patrolled Concord space, it looked like a child's toy. But every ship in the defense fleet kept its distance. Every weapon system tracked the tiny vessel's approach. Every eye in the station watched as it docked at the diplomatic platform without resistance. Director Wei stepped off the ship alone. She was older than she had appeared in her transmissions, her hair fully white now, her face lined with the weight of the decisions she had made. She wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations, no symbols of rank. She carried nothing but a small data device in her hand. 12 species had gathered to meet her. Representatives from every major power in the galaxy stood in the diplomatic chamber, surrounded by guards and advisors and scientists who had spent 6 months trying to understand what Earth had become. Ambassador stepped forward to greet her. His empathic senses reached out carefully, trying to read the human woman who had changed everything. He felt sadness, deep, profound sadness, mixed with determination and something he could not quite identify. "Director," he said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Concord, I welcome you to our station. We have many questions." "I know," replied. Her voice was softer in person than it had been in her transmissions, gentler, "and I will answer them, but first I must show you something." She activated the data device. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, visible to all present. It showed the Draconian fleet, 40,000 ships, floating in perfect formation within pockets of folded space. The crews were visible through enhanced imaging, Draconian soldiers frozen in stasis, their faces still showing the fear of their last conscious moments. "They are alive," said, "all of them. We have not harmed a single one." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once, demanding explanations, threatening consequences. Raised a hand and they fell silent. "You kept us in a cage for 300 years, she continued. "You told yourselves we were animals, too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent to be trusted with the stars. She paused, letting her words settle into the silence. And perhaps you were right about one thing. We are violent. We have always been violent. It is in our nature in a way that most species do not understand. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each representative in turn. But violence is not all we are, and you, all of you, never tried to find out what else we might become. Representative found his voice. What do you want from us, Director? Apologies, reparations. We will give you whatever you demand. Just tell us what you want. Shook her head slowly. We do not want your apologies. We do not want your wealth. We do not want conquest or revenge. Then what? Asked softly. Changed the holographic display. The image of the captured fleet vanished, replaced by something else, something that made every being in the chamber take an involuntary step backward. It was darkness, not the darkness of space, but something deeper, something alive. A vast shadow that stretched across light years, moving through the void between galaxies with terrible purpose. This, said quietly, is what we want to talk about. The chamber fell absolutely silent. The species who lived on Earth before us, we call them the architects, did not build their technology for war. They built it for defense, for survival. His voice grew heavy with the weight of 10,000 years of history. They had seen this coming. They had seen what it did to other galaxies. They tried to stop it and they failed. She gestured at the image of the approaching darkness. They left us everything they had, their technology, their knowledge, their warnings. They told us that we would face the same enemy they faced, and they told us that we might succeed where they failed because we had something they did not. What? Whispered. Smiled, but there was no joy in it. Violence, aggression, the willingness to fight even when victory seems impossible. The architects were a peaceful species. When the darkness came, they could not bring themselves to destroy it. They could only run and hide and eventually die. She looked around the chamber again, at the representatives of 12 species who had feared humanity for 300 years. We swallowed the Draconian Armada because we needed you to understand. We needed you to see what we have become, not your enemies, not the savages you imagined. We have become your immune system. We have spent 3 centuries building weapons that can fight something that has consumed entire galaxies. She pointed at the holographic image of the approaching darkness. This entity, we do not know its name if it even has one, has been traveling toward the Milky Way for longer than your species have existed. It will arrive within our lifetimes. When it does, it will consume every world, every species, every life form in this galaxy. The representatives stared at her in horror. Some looked at the image with disbelief, others with dawning terror. You cannot stop it alone, said slowly. That is what you are saying, you need our help. Yes, nodded. We have the weapons, we have the technology, but we do not have the resources to build what must be built. We do not have the numbers to fight a war across a galaxy. We need ships, we need soldiers, we need scientists and engineers and builders. She took a deep breath. We are asking, not demanding, for your help. We are asking you to join us in preparing for what comes next. We are asking you to trust that the species you called savage might be the only thing standing between you and extinction. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Emperor the Undying stepped forward from the Draconian delegation. He had come in person to negotiate for the return of his son, his fleet, his people. Now he looked at the human woman who had humiliated his empire, and he saw something he had never expected to see in a conquered enemy. He saw hope. My son, he said slowly, my fleet, you will return them. Yes, replied, all of them. We have no interest in prisoners. Studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his head in a gesture that no Draconian had made to another species in 1,000 years. Then tell me what you need, human. The Dominion will provide it. One by one, the other representatives stepped forward. The survivors who had never forgiven the Draconians but understood a greater threat when they saw one. Species that had been enemies for centuries found themselves standing together for the first time. Was the last to approach. He looked at with his silver eyes and felt her emotions more clearly than ever before. She was terrified, she was determined, and beneath it all she was hoping desperately that they would believe her. "What do you need from us?" he asked. Director Wei, first speaker of Earth, smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Everything." Far beyond the edges of the galaxy, in the darkness between stars, something ancient felt the ripple of spatial manipulation from a small solar system. It had been traveling for eons, following the trail of a species it had consumed long ago. It had not expected to find their children still alive. Slowly, patiently, it changed course. It began to move faster, drawn by the taste of familiar energy. The architects had thought they had escaped. They had thought they had hidden their offspring well. They were wrong. The darkness was coming. And this time, it intended to finish what it had started.